Okay, I'm trying this one more time. I'm back. I had to take a short break because we got some horrendous virus. It was not COVID, but I couldn't speak well and was super just unable to do a live because no one would want to listen to that annoying voice. So I'm back with Mindsight by Dr. Dan Siegel. And this is chapter 5, which is part 2 of this amazing book. This, I think what you're going to see now is how he takes the philosophy and all the things we talked about in part 1 and integrates them into a practice with patients in part 2. So it's kind of exciting. Also, there are hidden gems in here that I'm not going to share fully because I totally support Dan and his work, as I do all the authors of the novels and books that I review. This is one that he talks about specific meditation, so I would highly recommend if this is your jam or something that you'd be interested in, and you finding Mindsight and getting a hold of a copy so that you can go through those meditations, because I won't do those on here. I will look, though, like I did with Radical Acceptance, to see if he has any of the meditations for free. Sometimes the authors will make those available through different websites that they have. So I will look for those, and if I find them, I will post them in the video comments on YouTube or in my comments on Facebook if that's where you're catching this. So chapter 5 is called The Roller Coaster Mind. The cool thing about this is he's talking about the integration of consciousness, and he wants to highlight in this chapter the importance of focused attention and how through focused attention you can sense what is actually happening for you and then alter that. So it's super powerful stuff. I think if you watched my Radical Acceptance videos, you will see a nice correlation between Tara Brach and Dan Siegel and how that kind of intertwines when we're talking in the world of the mind and neuroscience and mindsight. So he does define mood here, and I thought it was good. He said, mood is basically the tone of your internal state, and that affect is really the external signals that reflect the feelings, actions, reactions. And so you can see that interplay between mood and affect and how those things change based on your mood. He then defines mindfulness, and he talks about mindfulness as this intentional presence, paying attention to the now. If you are a client of mine or want to be a client of mine, I am a big believer in the power of meditation and that focus of the now, that we cannot change the past and we cannot worry about the future. What we can do is focus on the now, and that's really what mindfulness is all about, really. Being fully present in the now, in the moment to moment, the changes that are occurring moment to moment. He says that, quote, it is paying attention to one's intention of the present moment from a stance that is non-judgmental and non-reactive. So if you want to take that definition and apply it to Radical Acceptance, that's what we talked about in Radical Acceptance, was being in a state where you are non-reactive and non-judgmental and accepting what is, right? So I love that those kind of intertwine. He said that self-observation is really tuning into the self. And he's going to talk about mindfulness in this chapter in relation to the adolescent mind, because the patient that he's talking about is a young teen. And I guess if you haven't read this, the story or the patient that he focuses on is a young teen who had some emotional issues, had a lot of symptoms that led the parents to become concerned about depression. There was drug addiction in the family and also bipolar. So they were concerned about that. And that's how the patient came to Dan after several, after several different doctors talked with the young child and then with Dan. They did believe it was a type of beginning of bipolar, and with the parents' permission and the patient's permission, Dan really wanted to focus on trying to utilize this idea of Mindsight to see if it could make a difference for this patient without medication. And this was, again, done under doctor supervision, so there's no like opinion about medication being good or bad. It's just that they decided for this young teen they wanted to try this first, kind of thing. And it was under heavily supervised conditions so that they could make sure that there was no decrease or downward spiral that was going to occur. So with this patient, Dan kind of goes over the wheel of awareness. I cannot remember if we talked about the wheel of awareness in part 1, but if you're interested in Dan's wheel of awareness, I know you can go to his website, and he has a picture of the wheel of awareness. Basically, it is like a bicycle tire, and if you think about the innermost part is the hub, that's your safe space that you can view things from, and then it's got spokes that go out to the outer rim, and that's kind of all the inputs. Those spokes are all the inputs that are happening, and he defines different sections, so every spoke kind of represents something different. He talks about that might be the 5 senses that you're getting input from. That might be sensations in your body. That might be thoughts, feelings, hope, perceptions. That might be memories. There's also a spoke for relationships. And all of these kind of come in from the outer rim, and we want to look at them from the safety and the centeredness of the hub. So I really was touched by this one part of the chapter, and I want to highlight it because I think it's really important for any of my clients who work on personal growth or any of my parenting clients, because what he says is so important. And he says, we are more than our thoughts and feelings. In other words, we can have thoughts and feelings and not be swept up in them, and we could notice them for what they are, with the knowledge that they are not our identity. And if you are coming here and have done any sort of digging into parenting gurus, Laura Markham, or I was going to say Dan Siegel, that's what he does, or Dr. Ross Green, any of those parenting gurus, you can find them on my website under resources. They talk a lot about how there's a big difference between feeling angry and an angry person. And it's really important that we kind of learn to delineate this both in our own minds and for our kids, because it's a scary place to be if you think you are anger. If that's an emotion that comes up a lot for a kid, it can be really scary to think that I am that kid. I am that evil, angry person. Instead of, I often feel angry, right? There's a difference there. And we don't have to be our feelings or our thoughts. Those are thoughts and feelings, and they come and go. And we all can have terrible thoughts, but that doesn't identify us. or come into our identity. And I thought that was so, so important when he mentioned that. I'm looking at my notes just so you know I'm not reading necessarily anything else. I'm just looking at all the notes I took. It really is just one part of our mind. And that part is really an experience. And we have the ability to look at that and experience that and also let it pass. And that's the beautiful kind of intention of mindfulness, is to be aware of what is coming into now, but not getting consumed by it, allowing it to pass. So we can also choose where and when to focus. So this is another part that he utilizes with his patient, which is, he might do a meditation and focus on one spoke of the wheel, like the senses. And again, with my clients, I often talk about using grounding techniques, especially if you're triggered by something and you feel yourself getting into an emotional state that is not grounded, or you're reacting how you don't want to react. You can focus again on grounding techniques, which would be the 5 senses. You can look at all the different spokes actually that he talks about. He also makes a point to say that mindfulness is a skill that needs to be practiced. He makes an analogy of it being like learning to play an instrument, where you might have to learn breath work, you might have to practice scales, you might have to do all these different pieces to really become masterful at playing that instrument. And the same thing goes for the mind. When you're practicing mindfulness, it is really important that you don't criticize yourself too harshly, that you take action and do it, and that you realize there's different aspects that you can focus on and you can build skill with, and it becomes different the longer that you do it. If you're wary of doing mindfulness for some reason, I know like many years ago in my own personal journey, I had come to mindfulness from a very biology background, neuroscience background. I wanted to really know the nitty-gritty of mindfulness. And so I read 10% Happier. And that's a great book if you have doubts, if you're kind of on the skeptical side of things and you're like, oh, that's a whole bunch of hooey, whatever, hippie people that just want to meditate all the time. It's a great book for that. So that's my pick if you are on the skeptical side. There is also the Happiness Lab podcast. I took that free course, I think it was through Coursera, from, I think she's Yale. And she taught about these techniques and really the science behind happiness. How do you be happier? It's intriguing and it's fantastic. And if you have some free time and you're a geek like me and you love to do lots of classes and coursework and challenge yourself, I highly recommend it. It's a good course. Really, it is in the end about taking the tools, having acceptance and compassion for yourself. You can look at feelings and not avoid them. And Dan says this is resilience. And when you build resilience, you become stronger for it. So it is about recognizing that your experience does not equal your identity. This is sounds like easy, right? Your experience is not your identity sounds really easy. Great advice. In practice, it's really difficult to overcome. It can take a long time. Don't give up on it, because we tell ourselves these stories and we tell our mind that because of these experiences, this is who we are. Whether that means I have bad luck in relationships, or for me, I'm a big girl. I'm always going to be a big girl. It's the story I tell myself over and over again. But the reality is that experience that I've had in life is not my identity, right? And noticing where I am in my bodily state and getting the right tools can really rewire your mind into a different place. So he talks about this as far as neuroplasticity. So when you utilize mindfulness correctly, you basically are taking advantage of what we now know occurs at all stages of life, which is the brain's incredible ability to rewire and create new pathways. And it's so, so important. This can happen at any age, right? Neuroplasticity is not only, at one stage. It can happen throughout your life. It is the changing of the brain. And he actually highlights 4 components that are really integral in utilizing neuroplasticity. One is that focused attention, that mindfulness practice, right? Where we focus. He talks about how you can see this in animals, right? That where they focus their attention, that focused attention, you will see really strong pathways. And you can look at that even with senses in animals, right? Like if they focus their attention on their hearing, that hearing becomes sharper. It's something they rely upon. You also know this, by the way, if you've read anything about brain traumas or injuries and recovery and rewiring, that focused attention can create a whole new neural pathway that's super, super strong. And you've probably also heard of this, and this would be related to people who are born blind or deaf or lacking one of the senses. Oftentimes people say, but I have such a increased ability to hear, or because I'm blind and I don't rely on that sense, that pathway in my brain, I utilize my other senses and they become keener, right? We've heard that, at least in passing. I think most of us have heard that. And it is true. That's how the brain works with that focused attention. Here are the other things that can really help with neuroplasticity. One is aerobic exercise. And it's so funny because I think for years, I think of Jane Fonda and, those aerobic exercises that we always thought that it was about heart health, a little bit about muscular health, but really it was about heart health and why it was important to have aerobic activity. But here's the thing. There has been recently tons of studies on how aerobic exercise affects the nervous system. And I've talked about this before in some of my lives where, again, if you want to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, one of the things is exercise, especially outside exercise. It stimulates your nervous system. This means that you can learn more readily. And this was really important in the beginning of ADHD research. There were several doctors who looked at how do we get kids to focus, what's going on with this like scatter to focus, and letting them run and then coming back and having shorter lessons actually increased their ability to learn. So there is a link between aerobic exercise and learning abilities and the neuroplasticity in the brain. Next, he talks about novelty, and that's new ideas or new experiences. Basically, when you push yourself to explore new ideas or get into a new situation, experience something new, you literally are laying down new neural pathways. Because you haven't experienced it before, your brain has to figure out how to do it. And so it creates new neural pathways. They've done tons of research on this. There's a link to myelin sheath development. There's even research, he says, on building neurons, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. And that is all about novelty, not doing the same old thing you've always done, but pushing yourself into a new experience. And the last thing that he talks about with neuroplasticity is emotional arousal. In other words, being rewarded for participation in an event. And that can be all sorts of kinds of rewards, mental rewards, or for animals, that can be physical rewards, right? Like if they participate in the hunt, getting the reward of the prey would be a type of emotional arousal. All of those things, with, focused attention kind of being the highlighted part, are what we use to take advantage of neuroplasticity. And all of those things can be super effective. So what he does with this young adolescent in this chapter is pretty remarkable. He utilizes journaling to kind of look at it as a reflection of the journey. It's pretty amazing what happens, where you have a teen going from emotions where he feels really strong emotions, he reacts really strong. P.S. That's totally normal for the adolescent brain. I'm in a couple of conferences right now, and they're talking about prefrontal cortex development. I talk about that extensively with my clients, and how during adolescence, we have certain parts of our brain that are turned on, including the part that experiences emotion is turned on, which is also, related to hormones and why you feel attraction to people around puberty age, right? It all makes sense, except your prefrontal cortex isn't completely formed yet. So it's really hard to have logical kind of connections to all these things that are happening. Like you are emotional, and that's normal. It's not easy to deal with. And I think in the past, oftentimes adults have ignored that, or said something kind of dismissive about it. Teenagers, right? It's important to recognize, like, that's brain growth that's going on right now. That's really important developmental growth. You leaning into friendships, you learning to stand on your own, develop your own interests, all super important developmentally. And also, you don't have all of your prefrontal cortex. So what does that mean? That means we have to recognize, if you can use mindfulness, so important, because you can recognize all your thoughts, feelings, emotions, right, that are happening. You can be aware of them in the present and realize, okay, wait, I'm feeling all these super intense things. That doesn't mean that's me. That means I'm experiencing them right now. And if you've read this chapter, it's pretty powerful, because this patient has some pretty intense emotions and feelings. And through reading some of his journal entries, you can hear how he himself thinks of himself first, like, I am feeling this, and it's me, and I'm on this boat, and it's taking me on this crazy wild ride. And then he realizes in his mindfulness practice that he can see the boat and recognize all of the emotions and take himself out of the boat. The boat still exists. He can watch it float, right? He can watch it go through the stream of consciousness, but he doesn't have to be on that boat, right? He can recognize it as an experience, as a feeling, as something that happened, and accept it for what it is, radical acceptance, but not be judgmental of it, not feel shame or guilt, not react to it, which is the powerful point, and kind of ground himself. I mean, it's incredible. And so he said, I don't take those thoughts so seriously anymore, and they don't take me on such a wild ride. That's a quote from the book. So powerful. So, like I said, Dan actually has a great meditation in this book, in this chapter. I will try to see if he has any available on the web and post them. If you have comments, questions, need to start a discussion, you can comment here. I will post this on my Facebook page, which is Best Self, Best Health, or on my YouTube channel, which is also Best Self, Best Health. And I will see you next week with chapter 6 of Mindsight. So have a fantastic week.